Success.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Welcome to Harbor House, another one of our Lunch and Learns. Today, we're going to be going over custody and placement. We have some really great special guests with us today. I want to introduce you. So first, we have Paul Schroth from Outagamie County Family Court Services Director. And we have Theresa Sokup, professional counselor at Outagamie County Family Court Services. And of course, we have our wonderful Donna, who is our Senior Manager of Legal Advocacy and System Change. So we work pretty frequently with the family court system, as you may imagine. And so we thought it would be helpful today if we had Donna, Theresa, and Paul go through our partnership, what Paul and Theresa have to do in their day-to-day, and how Harbor House and Outagamie can work together a little bit more. Before we kind of dive in, just a few housekeeping notes. If you are triggered by anything in this conversation today, or if you think you need some support or would like some support or have more questions that you don't want to ask on air, please feel free to reach out to us. Our number is 920-832-1667. And you can also email or message us at any time on Facebook. Also, if you do have questions that you would like answered while we're talking today, you can please comment on the post and we'll definitely get to them before the end of our discussion. So if we're ready to start, Paul and Theresa, could you just kind of give us a quick explanation of your program, what services you both offer, and who do you serve in those?
Absolutely. And I just want to start by saying thank you for having us here today. We're happy to give any information, and so we really appreciate you collaborating with us. As far as our program is really a dispute resolution program. And what our roles are to help parents who are navigating conflict when they're going through separation and divorce. So typically, one of the first things that will happen is parents will get ordered into one of our parenting education classes that precedes mediation. Usually along with that, they'll be ordered into our mediation program as well. We offer two parenting education programs. Our most familiar or most common one is called Children Caught in the Middle. It's offered on the second Thursday of every month. We also just recently, just a little over a year and a half ago, started a new parenting education class called Positive Co-Parenting that has been on a hiatus due to COVID. We have been offering a secondary Children Caught in the Middle on the dates that we would typically offer Positive Co-Parenting. But we developed that because we found there was a need for having a little bit more positive parenting education class that was geared more towards parents who maybe don't have as much conflict, don't have as much of a long-term history or relationship, and have younger children. So that one is really geared for those areas. Whereas Children Caught in the Middle is really about educating parents on how to navigate through the conflict and keep their children out of the middle of that conflict. So we cover a wide variety of topics in that one that are mainly about conflict resolution. We also talk about mediation and some of our other services at the end of both of those programs. It's kind of an orientation to the mediation process so that parents know what to expect and you're not coming into the mediation process blind. Mediation, as I said, is one of our most common services and usually is ordered at the same time as the parenting education class. Mediation is a process that is ongoing. Typically, parents attend more than one session, but we would schedule appointments for parents, and we would start with an hour-and-a-half appointment generally to gather information from both parents, kind of assess their needs and what are the areas of conflict that they're trying to work out. And then we would try to help them come up with a mediation agreement that they could then have incorporated into their court order. And then it keeps the decision making in their hands so that the court doesn't need to further get involved with making decisions regarding custody and placement. Some of the other areas we cover frequently in mediation, in addition to custody and placement, are holidays, vacation, transportation, exchanges, their children's activities, what school they might attend, if it's going to be public school or private school, religious involvement. There's a wide gamut of topics that we can address, really any area that the parents want to talk about other than financial areas. So things like child support, tax year exemptions, those are things we can't address in our mediation program. As I said, that's ongoing, so there's no limit to the number of appointments. On average, most parents meet with us 3 to 4 times, and then they conclude the mediation process. But some parents who are trying to work out things or maybe do trial placement periods where they're kind of gradually increasing placement or working on reunification with a parent, they may want to meet with us a little bit longer or more often, so that they can kind of work through those things in mediation before setting their agreement in stone and having that be part of their court order. So sometimes we do work with parents or families for upwards of 10 to 12 mediation appointments. It really depends on where the parents are at, what they're wanting, and what they're able to work through. Really, the key thing about mediation is parents really are the decision makers. Although we are determining whether to send it back to court, whether they have an impasse or whether they have an agreement, that's our role. They're really the ones deciding what they agree on and what they don't. We're not there to force them into any agreements. We're neutral. We're just there to help with the conversation, the communication, see if we can help them with that negotiation process so that they can keep that power in their hands. If they're not able to come to an agreement in mediation, then ultimately there would be either areas or the whole mediation would be declared as an impasse. An impasse means that they didn't agree. That would be then something to notify the court that further action needs to be taken. Typically, that's when a guardian ad litem would become involved, an attorney who would represent the children's best interests. They would meet with the family, make recommendations to the court, and potentially they could get sent back to our program for a custody study. A custody study is an in-depth family assessment. So we do those here in our program. Whereas mediation often has 2 professionals assisting the family. In a custody study, there's only 1 evaluator. So the evaluator would meet with the parents, would do home visits, would gather additional collateral information from professionals, and would also make recommendations to the court on what they feel is best for the children in that situation. So ultimately, if parents go through that whole process, they would go through mediation, potentially a guardian ad litem, potentially also a custody study, and then the final court hearing. Another service that we offer are step-parent adoptions. Those are a little bit separate, but for sometimes parents who end up coming to an agreement that one parent wants to terminate their rights, the other parent has remarried, and that parent wants to adopt the children, then they would come through our program. We would do a screening. It's not quite as in-depth, but it is just kind of checking in on the family functioning. And it's something that we would do a home visit, make sure everything looks appropriate, and then either recommend that the adoption go through or not go through. So that's another service that we offer.
Great. Before I let Paul go, Theresa, could you explain what a guardian ad litem is? I think a lot of people, if you're not familiar with family court or the court system, you might not have heard that term before.
Sure. A guardian ad litem is an attorney, so they come from a legal background. The attorney is appointed for the children, so that attorney represents the children or the child in that action. What their role is to make recommendations on what they feel is best for the children. So they're looking at a variety of factors, but they're really representing the child as an attorney. They wouldn't be somebody who would testify, but they would give recommendations. Kind of the difference between the guardian ad litem and a custody evaluator is that we're seen as an expert witness to the court. We are not an attorney. We come from mental health, social work, psychology backgrounds, and we have more background in child development. So we're seen more as an expert witness, and we would be potentially put on the stand to testify about our recommendations, whereas the guardian ad litem is going to ask questions or be an attorney that would be part of that other legal process.
That's great. Thank you. Paul.
But Theresa did a great job, so I don't have a lot to add, but just to emphasize, especially to citizens of Outagamie County, we're very fortunate to have a program like Family Court Services. Actually, Northeastern Wisconsin, Winnebago has a program as well. So does Calumet County. And as Theresa explained, this is a alternative dispute resolution program. So we're really working with parents to encourage that discussion, for parents to come together and to hopefully come up with a parenting plan that is suited for their children, that's in the best interest, that it keeps everyone safe. we're not here to just give you a cookie cutter pattern of what things are going to look for. And it's important to recognize that, because if you look at the background of all the mediators, the professionals in our office, minimally we have master's degrees, and it's something that we're here to make sure that you have the best parenting plan for your children, and that's really all I can say.
That's great.
I know you also asked about our roles. Paul is our director, so he has a little bit more of an administrative piece to his role, but he also does mediation and custody evaluation on occasion. And then I am primarily a mediator custody evaluator in my role, so I'm doing that pretty frequently, usually have a full-time caseload for that. And then as far as people that we serve, it would be anybody going through the family court system that's going through a separation, a divorce, or it could be parents who've already divorced and are coming back post-divorce to work out some issues. So really anybody, any parents that are dealing with conflict surrounding custody and placement.
That's great.
And especially for the mediation, you don't necessarily need to be court ordered into that. As Theresa was saying, that if you've gone through a program and you have previously had your mediation agreement made into a court order, that's seen as a long-standing court order. We have a clause that we put into each agreement that says parents may come back as long as they're equally paying the cost. And so we have that set up, so we're trying to get parents away from the court system, away from the adversarial fight, and maybe hopefully work together. And we try to offer a safe environment that they can do that.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Donna, could you touch on a little bit kind of why a partnership with Harbor House is so important?
Yes, and thank you, Theresa and Paul, for being here and speaking about your program and how we collaborate and partner, because it's probably lesser known that agencies work behind the scenes to really continue our education, continue the communication between agencies, and really for the best possible outcomes for the families that we equally, we're serving oftentimes the same families. So the partnership is critical, I think, because we're learning from their program, good, positive parenting techniques. How do you communicate after a separation? How do you keep the kids out of the middle of the divorce or separation? And clients that come to us are oftentimes at every different stage of that process. Mm-hmm. Maybe they haven't left yet and they're deciding how to get out. Maybe they've filed divorce or they're asking questions about how to. Maybe they've already been divorced and it's post-divorce litigation that they seek help because there's been a substantial change in their circumstance and they need support and help, and they come to Harbor House. We have myself and a legal advocate who can really go into the depths of those deeper questions. It is trauma for kids to experience parents separating. Parents that get along, it's still trauma. It's still hard for kids. But parents who are in a situation where there's domestic violence, it can be very, very difficult to navigate that and communicate effectively. So some of the things we do as partners is first understand each other's programs and roles very well. We keep that ongoing kind of communication between agencies so that we kind of understand our limitations as well as the things we can offer to a client. We're not promising things we can't really live up to, but we're also giving all the full picture of what's available to that family. I try to encourage people to seek mediation if it's appropriate after I know the facts of that case. Of course, sometimes it's very dangerous for people to be with their abuser. So that would be a situation where I would maybe make a phone call and say, this is a case where there's domestic violence, maybe we need to do it a different way. And they're very open and receptive to, in the family court services, to making sure this isn't a scary process, but really about getting an outcome for placement, for custody, just figure out what works. So it's never about putting a victim in more danger or anything like that, but it's more about, I know a little bit more, let me give you a little bit more safety planning as you seek that. But mediation can be a good first step. It's always encouraged, but it's not always successful when there's a lot of issues. Sometimes we're back in court, like Theresa mentioned, there might be impasse on certain issues, and custody and placement tend to be the two. And maybe we're then seeking a guardian ad litem. So there could be intervention at all different levels with the family court services in our program, because we're meeting that client where they're at and with the needs that they have. And it's often, for my lens in our legal program, a lens through safety first, and then we kind of get into the where can we come together on things. There is a problem with some families who constantly seek litigation, and we try to avoid that for the adversarial process that it is, the financial burden it creates. Most people can't afford to go to court as frequently as they are in court. For many, many reasons, it's not always under their control though. So mediation, seeking a guardian ad litem, and then usually the last step would be, like as Theresa mentioned, a custody study evaluation. Because advocates are unique in that we might work with a client once and never see them again. That happens. They come here, they seek the help they need at that moment of crisis or that need, and then we may or may not see them again. But there are plenty of clients that we work with for a long duration. So occasionally, if we have developed a long-standing relationship with that client where we know those hills they've crossed, we know a lot about the situation, we might offer some information to the evaluator about, here's what we've seen, here's what we've done, here's, and we only speak to the things that we have firsthand knowledge and that we have experience as we've worked on that case. So essentially, I wouldn't talk about a case or give my opinion on any case had I met that client once or twice. It wouldn't be appropriate. So we're selective in that regard. And we continue to work together on similar teams, like our domestic violence intervention team. Both Paul and Theresa are active members. Harbor House has a few members. We really know to better serve our families and our community, we all try to work together because we care very much about children's safety and also victim safety. So to do that, we have to partner.
Yeah. So I know we've covered a lot already in just this first kind of intro question. I think what would be helpful too is if you could kind of go, because I think what maybe people don't always understand is agencies like Harbor House don't always have this kind of relationship with the county that they're in, right? And I think Outagamie County and Harbor House are really fortunate because we have a really positive relationship with each other, and we've worked together Harbor House actually started as part of a county program before we became our own. So Paul and Theresa, if you could maybe touch a little bit on why that relationship is important to you, and why you work. Obviously Harbor House, we are in the court system all the time. We want to keep that relationship going. But I think from your perspective, it might be nice to hear why a partnership with an agency like Harbor House is important to you too.
So my personal experience and relationship with Harbor House, I was thinking about that this morning, goes back to 1989, 1990, and when I volunteered to work with the children's group with Wendy Gale, and it was an important volunteer experience because it really guided the direction I was going in school. I was a junior in college at the time, and so it really helped. And I saw firsthand the importance of advocating and making sure that everyone is safe. And then I fell into alternative dispute resolution. So when I came to the mediation program here, Family Court Services, and at the time it was Family Court Program, Barb Barzak, who was the former director, already had a good relationship. And when I became director, my viewpoint is let's continue this, let's strengthen this. As Donna was saying, it is so important for our program that we're balancing the safety of everyone, that we're looking at the best interest of children, and that we're also making sure that all voices are being heard. And the best way to make sure, especially with the safety, best interests of the children, is that we have a partnership with an organization who can call us out or give us that viewpoint of how we can improve ourselves. And we've already benefited since I became director. We revamped our background form, which is a checklist that is important for us when we're meeting with parents. We want to know in advance if there are concerns that we should be aware of, because it helps us make sure we maintain safety for families. So I can't say enough. And Theresa, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything that you and Donna have said. The only thing I would add is, yes, I definitely think our partnership definitely aids victims in the safety aspect. We have had advocates even like come through and walk through our department and point out things that may be intimidating or may, cause some fear or some anxiety in certain situations. When the new building was being developed, and I know this was prior to you being the director, Paul, but we took that into account, like some of the feedback we had gotten from Harbor House. And so when we developed our new space, we really incorporated a lot more safety and environmental precautions that we took. So we have 2 waiting rooms. One is a secured waiting room that we have to allow the parent to come back to, and it's not accessible to the public. So the other parent can't get to it unless we allow them back in. And it's all badge entrance, so they can't get through those locked doors. But we've taken a lot of different precautions as far as like staggering the start times of our mediation appointments, walking people to their cars. We have security in the building now, where we have sheriff's department officers that regularly patrol the building. In certain situations, if we know there's extreme conflict or potentially domestic violence, we can even have an officer come into our area if we need that, just to kind of have that presence to kind of enforce more security and maybe make people a little bit more compliant. But we have a lot of different things that Harbor House has recommended that we have then developed those things because of those relationships that we have. So I think really the benefit to collaborating is, like Donna said, we work with the same families. We want everyone to feel comfortable and safe in this process. We know that there's going to be a certain degree of discomfort because nobody just wants to be in court at all. But we want there to be as much comfort as possible in knowing what to expect and knowing how this can benefit parents, like knowing that this isn't just a stepping stone and that in some cases, a guardian ad litem and a custody study is where it needs to go. In other cases, that's not what's best for either parent, whether you're the victim or the perpetrator. So or for the family as a whole, including the children. Some parents don't want their children to be interviewed or be a part of that process. So knowing how they can put proposals out and what is going to be done to protect their safety and how a mediator is going to help with that negotiation process can be helpful for them coming into it, knowing what to expect and knowing that we're not going to force them into anything they don't want.
Yeah, thank you. I think we touched on, again, we touched on a lot, but I think, the court system, like you just kind of said, Theresa, it's so intimidating and no one really wants to be a part of it, but it's kind of what you have to do in some of these situations. So I wanted to do kind of a 2-part question. First, Donna, tell us when do you start looping in the court system, the family court system, when you're working with a client? How do you kind of work with a client to navigate that? Because it is overwhelming. And that's one of the reasons why we have 2 legal advocates now on staff, is because it's so much work and we want to make our clients feel comfortable. And then Theresa and Paul, could you talk about any instances you've had where you've actually had to loop in Harbor House, where you've discovered maybe that there was domestic violence that they hadn't maybe discovered yet or realized, or maybe hadn't really communicated yet to anyone else? So if you guys could, we'll start with Donna and then we'll go back to Theresa and Paul.
Absolutely. So it could be the first appointment I have with somebody, perhaps, like if there's so many people who have no clue where to begin. They don't even know how to file the paperwork and they have no idea the community resources that are available. So Harbor House, not just myself, but all the advocates, we really try to know what resources are out there and how do they benefit our clients, so we can speak fluently, confidently about them. So one thing I can do and say confidently is talk about the family court services to dispel any of the myth they might have or the anxiety. I mean, I suppose I can't remove all anxiety, but I think I can lessen it by explaining the process is not somebody telling you you must do this and your placement has to look this way. Not at all. It's more like they are there to facilitate, referee, kind of calm the waters when things, this isn't going to be somebody forcing you down a path you don't want to take. Just like it is right now when we're discussing, I would tell a client, like, I'm here to walk with you, not tell you what to do, not pull you along. But so it's a lot about informing about explaining the resources in the overall process and what it looks like. A lot of times, if it's the case that, like Theresa said, not all cases need to go to the level, and we hope that they don't. Nobody goes into it going, God, I hope your divorce takes 2.5 years and you go through all these things. It's really about, here's the way in and here's the possibilities. And sometimes people are forced down that long road because they are working with a partner who's not going to give an inch. And we know that, I'm sure Theresa and Paul see that too. We have all types of cases, but where our partnership can really work is like they can explain about what we can offer. We also do that there, where mediation, you can cover what will pick up look like, how will you communicate? We tell them about programs like Our Family Wizard, and we kind of plant the seed, because a lot of times people are not trusting right off the bat, right? So if they're working with somebody they came to for an appointment, and sometimes mediation's court ordered, it's not always an option. It's not always we're going to go there voluntarily because we get along. So many times it's the court commissioner starting there as step one. So that might put somebody in a situation, some of our clients, like, this isn't fair. Why do I have to do that? So we can be really good at kind of calming the nerves and explaining the process and the good aspects of it. Here's why this is helpful. It's much better than being maybe with your abuser alone trying to decide these things. You're going to be, like Theresa said, they've done so much to try to keep the area safe, secure, acknowledging if there's domestic violence and letting that victim explain, be way ahead of coming there. Here's the things that I'm concerned about. That's huge, so that victim feels there's some control back in what's going to happen to them. I think that's really important. So family court services, it starts with me explaining their services oftentimes if they've never been a part of it. It's really that simple. Step one would be that. But then if they come to me at different stages, or they come to our program and different advocates meet them too, we kind of know that process, and we look at where's there room for agreement. What are your absolute things that you aren't going to budge on? We kind of have those pros and cons lists. We have it surrounding the safety that needs to be in place, right? So that's the core of the work that we do. And then family court services, sometimes it's about understanding the parenting plan isn't just something that isn't important. It can really alleviate all those questions and those things that pop up that you didn't plan for. Thanksgiving, who's going to have the, I try to encourage people to really work those things out ahead of time and get it on paper, so that you're not calling, God forbid, like the police on Thanksgiving night because we didn't discuss who's going to do. It's a lot of that stuff. So we do a lot of the same thing, but just from a different viewpoint, and we come probably at a different approach, because we're always at the core of domestic violence and the safety piece. And then here we go. Let's, talk about those other aspects, because when there's custody and placement, there's so much to talk about. But I feel confident in the program that we have at the county. Family court services really does, not just say they do, they really do want to understand domestic violence and all the nuances that come with it and the safety concerns. So I think I probably over answered your question, but I can't stress enough that knowing each other's programs and what we can offer to a client is extremely helpful to building the trust with that client to seek the services to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your question was like, what are our experiences with referring to Harbor House? And well, right off the bat, like one of the things we regularly do in our education classes is we will mention community resources, and Harbor House is one that we mentioned right during that presentation. So while we're not one-on-one with a parent, there's multiple parents in that class. We're often showing the Harbor House brochure and putting your number in the chat right now, because we're doing it on Zoom. But like if we're doing it in person, we always have brochures out with Harbor House information on there. If people come up to us with questions during breaks or ask questions during that group, we'll often refer them to Harbor House. I have had a couple of instances where parents have come into mediation, have, brought up concerns that they weren't identifying as domestic violence, but were really in that realm of domestic violence. And well, we have a role of neutrality, and we can't break that neutrality role, but we might say to them, have you ever heard of Harbor House, or are you connected with them? Or have you ever done any safety planning about these concerns? Have you talked to anybody about it? And if they say no, then we would give them, a brochure and say, this is an option. We never tell parents that they have to do that. We never, put that out there just to one parent or the other. Oftentimes we'll present it to parents the same information. Have you heard of Harbor House? Do you want to reach out to them? We've had a couple parents do that. I've also had a few experiences. They're not extremely common, but I have had a couple of times where parents have asked to have an advocate come to mediation with them. And I have had that happen in kind of one of our standard mediations where the parents were together and there was an advocate there with the mediators. We just tell the advocate they can't, be in the role of the mediator or speak or ask questions. They're really just there for support for the person who needs them. And then they can talk with that person after or before, but not during the mediation session. And then I've also had a couple of shuttle mediation appointments where the parents are in separate rooms. So they never see each other, but the parent who is identifying the safety concerns might want an advocate with them when they're coming to meet with us just for that support. So I've had that a couple of times. Like I said, it's not extremely common, but it is something that we allow in our program if parents need that additional support. Paul, anything?
Yeah, I mean, since I've started with this program, and even before I came to Family Court Services, I worked in Child Protective Services, and Harbor House has always been there. Anytime I've reached out, seeking, just some insight into a concern, Harbor House has been there, and it's one of those things that, the community is very lucky to have Harbor House because of all the advocacy work that it does. It's my belief that, we should welcome parents that come in with an advocate because they have support, they have knowledge, and that's a better place to be than parents who come in and they're fearful, or they may have some misconceptions about the process or about what this all means. So the parents that are connected with Harbor House usually they're in a better place and they're more confident in the direction they go. And we want to encourage that. So we've had it where parents will bring an advocate with them to wait with them. And any parent can do that. So the fact that Harbor House offers that, I'm aware that Harbor House is present for some of the Safe Exchange. And Safe Exchange is an organization that we have run through the county where parents can safely, in a public setting, our parking lot, which has numerous cameras, can safely exchange their children. And I'm aware, in addition to the Outagamie County staff that are working that and making sure, monitoring everything is safe, often Harbor House has someone present as well. So, I mean, it's just a good network. It's a good partnership. It really helps. And I think it's a good thing for parents to be involved when they need it.
It's really great. Thank you, guys. I think you asked, one of the questions we had ahead of time was, how does a family court system kind of change or modify their process when we do have domestic violence presence? And I think you already kind of answered that. You are really flexible, and if it's too dangerous, you're willing to work around that. So thank you for that, because again, it's not true in every county system. And again, Harbor House is lucky to be in this partnership with you as well, just because you do have the understanding of the complications and the danger that can exist in domestic violence.
The only thing I'd like to add to that, Cassie, though, is that we do really try to take the safety concerns into account when we know about them. There are times when we don't know, though. We do send out a background form, as Paul mentioned, that we've collaborated with Harbor House on to make sure that the questions, accurately reflect, is this domestic violence? And so it's like a checklist that looks like this. And it will be in the handouts and supplemental materials that Harbor House will have available to people to review. So that's a good indicator for us if there are concerns. But if we don't get those back, or if we don't know whether there's a restraining order, because sometimes our files and the court files are separate and we don't always see if a restraining order is in effect or if there's an injunction, then we're going to just proceed business as normal. And in some unfortunate situations, we have had parents come in who have an injunction in place and we didn't realize, and then it's created some uncomfortable situations. So if you are, somebody who's planning on going through our program, or you're working with somebody who might be going through our program, and we've talked with Harbor House about this before, it is really important to reach out to us in advance prior to the mediation appointment so we do know, and then we can take those precautions.
Yeah, and I'm going to use the corny line that knowledge is power. And so maybe the better word is empowerment. If we have that information that Theresa's talking about, the better you'll be, the better we'll be in terms of making sure that it's a good experience for you, a safe experience.
Thank you.
Right, I was just gonna, oh, go ahead. I was just gonna add that same thing. And one thing I forgot to mention that's really critical and important and at the, basis of what we do is confidentiality. So I would never be talking to Theresa or Paula or anybody in their program if a client hasn't given me that permission. And I think sometimes we get so excited to talk about our programs that I sometimes forget. Step one is really honoring, and I respect and I follow the law when it comes to confidentiality. So we don't have communication unless there's a release of information and a waiver of that non-disclosure. So that's step one. And oftentimes clients are more than willing, wanting, and happy that we're willing to go, hey, do you want me to call before your mediation appointment? Or do you need, most of the time people, but I just want to make that clear. That's really driven by the client. So we don't force any sort of, can I release your confidential information? We decide what information to share based on what that client is ready to share. So it's really driven by the client. And I think that's really important that if anyone's listening to this, that they know they can come to seek help from us, and we're not collaborating with other systems at all without their input and their desire for us to do so.
Thank you for adding that. I think that's really important.
And let me just add too, going back to our partnership, and because it's such a long-term partnership, we understand each other's programs and the limits that we have with privacy and confidentiality, and we really respect that between both partners.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, we take confidentiality really seriously at Harbor House, but Donna's right. We don't always bring that up first. But again, unless you explicitly say, if Theresa were to call me and ask about someone she's working with, I can't say anything. It doesn't matter. So again, reiterate, both court systems here and Harbor House take this very seriously. So thank you. We did have a question actually from someone watching. Wanted to bring out, COVID obviously is hot topic for everyone. So when you've had to kind of transition to that virtual over the last year with the court services, what were some challenges you faced, but what were some things that maybe worked out really well by switching to virtual, and what kind of things were you able to offer your clients and the people that you work with, and anything you might see moving forward with that?
Sure. Paul, did you want to start with this one, or do you want me to?
Yeah, why don't you start?
Okay, so as a mediator, during COVID, what we initially did as soon as the pandemic struck is we kind of transitioned everything to phone. We didn't have professional Zoom accounts set up yet, and we were worried about security issues due to, at the time, there was a lot of media news stories coming out about Zoom being hacked and things like that. So we were very cautious about the video conferencing in the beginning. And we did only offer to continue to mediate via phone. We did run into a few challenges with that, although some people really liked the phone and felt more comfortable because they didn't have to physically see the other parent face to face. They could, felt like they could be more assertive and could maybe voice their opinions more. Others really didn't like it and felt like they couldn't guarantee the other parent was abiding by the guidelines and confidentiality. They didn't know if there was other people in the room listening in, or if they were recording or things like that. So there were some challenges that came up. We did, shortly after the pandemic started, got our Zoom accounts set up, and we did start transitioning to Skype and to Zoom. We primarily are doing it via Skype or Zoom at this time, but we still do offer phone for parents who don't have internet capabilities or Skype capabilities, or can't access Zoom for whatever reason, if they don't have a microphone or, a computer or smartphone or anything like that. So we do phone sometimes, or if a parent requests that, in some domestic violence cases, still, I do have parents that prefer phone over Zoom. So I still offer it as an option, even though Zoom is our preferred, because we can guarantee that confidentiality a little bit more. We can, navigate the conflict a little bit better when we're seeing parents' facial expressions. Although I will say that can fuel the conflict sometimes too, because then parents can see each other rolling their eyes or shaking their head or doing whatever it might be, and then that can escalate things. But for us, it's easier to assess those concerns if we're seeing people on video as well. However, we do make exceptions in cases where, maybe somebody's more comfortable with proceeding via phone.
And I just want to say, Zoom isn't perfect, Skype isn't perfect, but I am very thankful that the technology was there when the pandemic hit us, because, one of the things that we started doing right off the bat was relaunching our children education classes in addition to the mediations. And it's my understanding that we were ahead of many similar departments in the state of Wisconsin. And that's all thanks to not only Zoom, but also we have a great partnership with Karen Dickrow from the UW Extension. And she was the one that really was, talking about Zoom and saying, is this a route to go? And fortunately, we were able to launch that. And if we look at how we proceed, because we're not out of the woods yet with COVID, we still have this tool that we're using, and it's something we discovered. I think in how can we use this well, maybe not post-pandemic, but once things settle down more and we open our doors and we're inviting people in, there's a good chance we will continue this more than a year from now. It probably will be an indefinite thing that we have this additional tool so we can meet the needs of parents.
We'll have policies in place where we would determine where and when it's appropriate, of course, but it will probably be something we still offer, just as we had offered Skype in the past prior to the pandemic. That was primarily for parents who lived more than 200 miles away or fit certain criteria where they physically could not be present in the mediation. Maybe they lived in a different state or sometimes a different country. So in that situation, then we would do Skype. Now we have Zoom as well, which I feel like a lot of the parents seem to like Zoom more than Skype and seem to feel it's a little bit more secure. We usually password protect it. We have a waiting room. We can turn off the chat so that they can't communicate with each other that way, so that they're not being harassed during mediation.
Yeah, I love the waiting room aspect of Zoom.
Oh, that's really great. And I think it's really helpful that you've covered too, that you do try and make people feel as safe as possible, even in this technology world, or when you're in person. If if you have that knowledge that they might not feel safe with that partner, you're willing to do whatever you can within reason to make them feel safe. And I think that's really important for everyone to understand. So thank you. We do have, you talked about some of that kind of harassment, maybe from one partner to another. And obviously in domestic violence, we see a lot of that. And so how do you kind of approach that family, or if there's a family thinking mediation isn't worth it? And maybe all three of you can answer this. How do you talk to someone about when their partner they think is just so unreasonable that they don't think mediation is a good use of time? They don't want to go through the family court system. Donna, what kind of, if they're so terrified of their partner, they don't even want to bring it up. How do all of you kind of address those situations? Do you still push mediation, or what are your kind of thoughts on that?
You want me to start with that, or okay?
I can start, or you can start if you want.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, one of the things that, I've shared with some other advocates, and this is where we've educated each other sometimes too, is that mediation, there is a statutory requirement for mediation. It's usually the first step of the court process. Now that can be overcome by factors like domestic violence, but that person has to tell the court that and ask for mediation to be waived. Once they're sent here, if they're here on an order, we can't disregard the order. They're coming into mediation, and what might happen is during that first appointment, we might assess and decide, yeah, this is not an appropriate case, and we would mark the case as inappropriate and send it back to the court. So that does happen on occasion where, you know, it's like a one and done. We get them in, we assess, and we're like, this isn't going to work. And we send it back to court. But if they're already ordered into mediation, then they're coming into mediation unless they're not complying with that order.
And I would also reiterate the advantage if people are really seeking resources before they're stepping into the courtroom, they're going to be miles ahead of somebody who has not done that, especially if there's no attorneys involved. And many people in family court simply don't have attorneys. I know in the 14 years of being in a family court system in one capacity or another, I've heard the number go way up from the percentage of people who had counsel to not. So it's kind of been more and more every year. So seeking your resources out so you understand the processes ahead of time before that first court hearing, like in a divorce, it would be the temporary order hearing, is hugely beneficial. So if I do have a case, and I have plenty of those where it is a high lethality situation, where mediation is absolutely not appropriate. Or sometimes there's an incarceration or, you know, lots of factors, or a revocation and somebody's going back to prison. I mean, there's so many different things that could be at play. That would be a perfect example where I would tell somebody, you can go to court at your temporary order hearing, you know, and sometimes there's already a restraining order, there's other things going on, but you can ask that court commissioner to bypass the mediation, just like Theresa mentioned. So I like the knowledge is power, even though it's a little cliche. I use it with my clients because it's just the truth. The more you know, the better prepared you go in to represent yourself in court. Because often there's an idea that there's some knowledge out there that we have of cases. You know, people think that we're all talking or we all have this, you know, easy button where we can read. It's just not the case. So I work with people on how to tell their story appropriately about the facts that the court needs to know. You know, there's certain facts if the court doesn't know, they can't make a ruling or decision for you in the best interest of your safety. So a lot of that would be those kind of discussions, saying there are options, but same with family court services. If I know they're heading over to mediation and it's not court order or something like that, you know, I would tell them, here's what you can do. Let that court program know of your situation ahead of time. People just don't necessarily realize they have any ability to do those things. So I don't think it's for a lack of not wanting it. It's oftentimes just simply not knowing they can.
Right. So we're actually running out of time already. I know we have a couple questions left, but if you guys could just quickly give your last thoughts. We are going to put on our website and link in the bottom of this live. It'll stay on Facebook, so you can watch us if you missed it. But we'll also put kind of some resources, videos, books that you can, and then resources with the family court system as well as Harbor House. So you can check those and look after. But do you guys have any last thoughts that you want to share before we have to wrap it up?
Well, I would just second everything that Donna just said. Absolutely, 100% knowledge is power. I know Paul mentioned that before. We do try to educate parents in the mediation process as well. That is something that we do informal. It's kind of more informal education, and to help with the negotiation process as well. But back to that question that you had asked, Cassie, if there are significant safety concerns, we will do everything in our power to make sure that that safety is addressed. And we're not going to put a parent in an unsafe situation. We've even had parents that come in on completely separate days, separate times, maybe weeks apart, that we're meeting with them to gather that information we need. Or if it's really unsafe for somebody to come in, that might be a situation where we would do over the phone with them or Zoom, or do some other form of use of technology so that we could keep them safe and have those precautions in place. That's ultimately our goal.
And I want to say too that I think in today's climate, we have to be on guard the whole time, recognizing there could be domestic violence. And so I know I can speak for myself, for Theresa, that we are constantly assessing every time parents sit down. And it's not just the first meeting, but throughout the process. We're wanting to make sure that parents are coming to a mutual agreement, that they're not being forced into something, or that they feel, well, this is the best I can do, or I don't want to go to court. We want to make sure that you know what you're dealing with, you know what what the ramifications are, so you can make the best decision for your children.
And lastly, I will say we are mandated reporters. So even though mediation is confidential, if there are safety concerns, including threats to harm the other parent or the children or anything like that, if one parent threatens that to us, we can then break that confidentiality and report to the authorities, and we can notify the person that that threat was made against so that they can safety plan and prepare. So, you know, that has happened at least once while I've been in this program, where I've had to call the authorities, or me and another mediator did, because a threat was made by a parent to harm the other parent. So that is an exception we have, where we wouldn't maintain neutrality or confidentiality in those situations. Other exceptions would be child abuse or neglect or threats to harm yourself. So any like suicidal ideation or things like that too.
Yeah, and I've had the experience too of actually calling the police when it was quite clear there was a threat to the mother. So, I mean, it's one of those things where we're just making sure everyone is safe, and it's not just limited to child abuse concern. It's for all life. We want to make sure that everyone comes in, is able to leave, and there isn't a problem.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for being so aware and recognizing and willing to learn about domestic violence, and for your continued partnership. Again, we're really grateful to be able to have these connections with you in relationships. And I think it's just better for all the families in our community that we can keep working together. So thank you all. Thank you again for taking your time, Theresa and Paul. Thank you everyone for watching. Again, we have resources for you on our website, as well as in the bottom of this video link. And you're welcome to call or reach out to Harbor House or Family Court whenever you need anything from us. So thank you everyone, and we'll see you at our next Lunch and Learn.
Thank you.
Thank you.